Hi everyone, my name is Lauren. I'm 33 years old, and I've spent most of my life being the second best daughter in my own family. Growing up, my parents made it clear that my younger sister Emily was the star of the show. She was their golden child, the one who could do no wrong, while I was always the afterthought. Emily is 2 years younger than me, and from the moment she was born, she seemed destined to outshine me in every way. She was effortlessly charming, academically brilliant, and conventionally beautiful. While I was average in every sense, average grades, average looks, Emily excelled. She was valedictorian in high school, captain of the debate team, and even did some modeling during college. Our house became a shrine to her achievements. Every wall was decorated with her awards, certificates, and photos from her glamorous events. Meanwhile, my accomplishments were lucky to get a fleeting acknowledgement before the conversation shifted back to Emily. I'll never forget the day I realized just how different our lives were destined to be. It was the day I graduated from college with my degree in computer science. I was the first in my family to pursue a tech degree, and I was incredibly proud of myself. But as I walked through the front door, diploma in hand, my mom barely looked up from the kitchen table. Instead, she waved a framed photo of Emily's latest modeling shoot. "Look how stunning your sister looks in this," she beamed, completely ignoring my achievement. That moment stuck with me. It was like a switch flipped inside me. I stopped trying to earn their approval because I realized that no matter what I did, I would never be Emily. Over the years, I've built a good life for myself. I work as a senior software developer at a reputable tech company. I have a circle of supportive friends. And most importantly, I found someone who truly sees me for who I am. My husband, Jake. We met at a tech conference 4 years ago, and from the moment we started talking, I knew he was different. He never compared me to anyone else. He appreciated my dry sense of humor, my passion for coding, and yes, even my quirks. After 4 years of dating, Jake proposed to me during a quiet night at home. It wasn't a grand gesture or some elaborate event. It was just us, takeout on the coffee table, our favorite show playing in the background, and him getting down on one knee. It was perfect. Naturally, I wanted to share the news with my family. I knew their reaction might be lukewarm, but I still held out hope that maybe, just maybe, they would be happy for me. I was wrong. When I told my parents that I was engaged, there was an awkward silence. My mom's first comment wasn't, "Congratulations," or, "I'm so happy for you." Instead, she said, "Are you sure you want to rush into this? Maybe you should focus on losing a bit of weight before the wedding." My dad barely looked up from his newspaper. That should have been my first warning sign, but I was too caught up in the excitement of planning a wedding to dwell on it. Jake's family, on the other hand, welcomed me with open arms. His mom threw herself into wedding planning with enthusiasm, treating me like the daughter she never had. She helped me pick out my dress, organize the guest list, and even hosted a beautiful bridal shower. Meanwhile, my parents remained distant. They made excuse after excuse to avoid helping with the wedding preparations. I sent both electronic and physical invitations to everyone, including my parents and Emily. I even confirmed the delivery of the invitations, but as the RSVP deadline approached, I noticed that my parents hadn't responded. I tried calling, texting, and emailing. My messages were met with vague responses like, "We're busy," or "We'll check our schedule." They never committed to attending, and deep down, I knew they weren't planning to come. Jake noticed my growing anxiety and tried to reassure me. "If they don't come, that's their loss," he said. "We're going to have a beautiful wedding, with or without them." And he was right. Our wedding day was perfect in every way that mattered. We had a small garden ceremony, surrounded by friends and family who genuinely cared about us. The sun was shining, the flowers were in full bloom, and we couldn't stop smiling at each other. Everyone commented on how happy and in love we looked, but there were moments when their absence was like a shadow over the day. During the father-daughter dance, I had to swallow the lump in my throat as Jake's mom stepped in to dance with me instead. When I saw the empty seats in the front row, where my parents should have been, I felt a pang of sadness that I couldn't ignore. After the wedding, we went on a blissful honeymoon. I tried to push thoughts of my family out of my mind, focusing instead on this new chapter with Jake. But as soon as we returned, I knew I needed answers. Why hadn't my parents come? Why hadn't they even sent a message to acknowledge the wedding? I couldn't let it go. When I finally got through to them on the phone, their response left me stunned. My mom claimed they were deeply hurt because they never received a formal invitation. She accused me of excluding them intentionally. I was dumbfounded. I knew for a fact that we had sent them both types of invitations. I even had delivery confirmations. They were gaslighting me, trying to rewrite reality to fit their narrative. "I'm sorry if there was a mistake," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But inside, I was boiling with anger. I ended the call as soon as I could, not wanting to give them the satisfaction of seeing me upset. Later, Jake and I sat down to review everything. He pointed out the moments leading up to the wedding that I had tried to brush off: the lack of enthusiasm, the cryptic phone calls with Emily, and their overall indifference. "They weren't planning to come from the start," he said. "They just couldn't handle the fact that you got married before Emily." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. It all made sense. They had spent years building up this perfect image of Emily, the successful, beautiful daughter who would have the grand wedding and the perfect life. And I had disrupted that narrative by getting married first. For the first time in my life, I realized that no matter what I did, I would never be enough for them. And the saddest part? I didn't even want to try anymore. Returning to normal life after the honeymoon felt surreal. For a while, I managed to avoid family drama by throwing myself into work and spending time with Jake. But the unresolved tension lingered in the back of my mind, like a loose thread I couldn't stop tugging. The final straw came when my aunt called me out of the blue. "Lauren, did you hear? Emily's engaged," she said, her voice practically vibrating with excitement. "Your parents are thrilled. They've already started planning her wedding." I froze. I hadn't spoken to my parents since the wedding fiasco, and now I was hearing about Emily's engagement from a relative. It was like a slap in the face. "Wow," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice neutral. "That's great news." My aunt went on about the extravagant plans: designer dresses, exclusive venues, and a massive guest list. My mom, apparently, was fully involved in every detail. It was everything they had refused to do for me. After hanging up, I sat in silence, processing the news. They hadn't lifted a finger for my wedding, but were going all out for Emily's. I shouldn't have been surprised, but it hurt more than I cared to admit. Jake noticed my mood immediately when he got home. "What's wrong?" he asked, sitting next to me on the couch. I told him everything about the call from my aunt, the lavish plans for Emily's wedding, and the blatant favoritism. He listened quietly, his expression growing darker with each word. "They're unbelievable," he finally said. "They couldn't even show up for your wedding, but they're bending over backward for hers?" I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. "It's like I don't exist to them." Jake took my hand, squeezing it gently. "You do exist. To me, to our friends, to everyone who actually matters. Don't let them make you feel invisible." His words comforted me, but the hurt didn't magically disappear. Over the next few days, I noticed a shift in myself. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done chasing their approval, done trying to understand their motives, and done letting them dictate my worth. A few weeks later, another bombshell dropped. My cousin, who I'd always been close to, sent me a text. "Hey, just wanted you to know people are talking about how your parents skipped your wedding. A lot of relatives aren't happy about it." Apparently, word had spread through the family. Relatives were questioning my parents' behavior, and some had even declined invitations to Emily's engagement party in solidarity with me. I wasn't sure how to feel about it. On one hand, it was validating to know that others saw the injustice. On the other, I dreaded the inevitable fallout, and it didn't take long for that fallout to arrive. It all started with a series of passive-aggressive messages from my mom. "I heard you've been spreading stories about us," she texted one evening. "Why are you trying to ruin your sister's special day?" I stared at my phone, feeling a familiar mix of frustration and exhaustion wash over me. I hadn't spread any stories. I'd simply told the truth when relatives asked why my parents hadn't attended my wedding. But to my mom, the truth was inconvenient. I didn't respond. I wasn't going to get drawn into another emotional tug-of-war. The next day, my dad called. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. "Lauren," he began, his tone already defensive, "your mother and I are very hurt by what's going around. We've done everything we can to support you girls. And this is how you repay us?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm. "Dad, all I've done is tell people the truth. You didn't come to my wedding. You never even acknowledged it. We didn't feel welcome," he said. "You never made us feel included." "Not welcome?" I repeated, incredulous. "I sent you invitations. I called, texted, and emailed. What more was I supposed to do?" There was a long pause before he spoke again. Emily's engagement has been very emotional for your mother. She always pictured both of you getting married around the same time. It's been hard for her to adjust. Ah, there it was. Emily. The center of their world, as always. This isn't about Emily, I said, my patience thinning. This is about you skipping my wedding because it didn't fit your perfect narrative. Dad sighed heavily. You're reading too much into it. No, I'm not, I snapped, my voice rising despite my best efforts. You prioritized Emily's hypothetical wedding over my real one. That's the truth, and everyone sees it. The conversation ended soon after. He didn't apologize. He didn't acknowledge my feelings. Instead, he wrapped it up with a vague, "We'll talk again soon," which I knew was code for, "Let's pretend this never happened." But it didn't end there. A few days later, Emily herself reached out. Her text was predictably condescending. "I'm really disappointed in you, Lauren. You're causing unnecessary drama, and it's making things hard for Mom and Dad. Can't you just be happy for me? Happy for her?" I almost laughed out loud. She hadn't even acknowledged my wedding, and now she expected me to play the supportive sister for her grand event? I ignored the message, but Emily wasn't one to be ignored. The next morning, she showed up at my door. "Lauren," she said, as I opened the door, flashing her trademark fake smile. "We need to talk." I didn't invite her in. Instead, I stepped outside, crossing my arms. "What do you want?" She looked taken aback by my cold reception. "Why are you making this so difficult? You know how important my wedding is to our family." "Our family?" I repeated. "You mean the family that skipped my wedding? That's not fair," she said, her voice rising. They were hurt. They felt left out. I shook my head. They weren't left out. They chose not to come. There's a difference. Emily's smile faded. "You're just bitter because my wedding is going to be bigger and better than yours." There it was, the real Emily, always needing to feel superior. "You know what?" I said, my voice steady. "You're right. Your wedding probably will be bigger and flashier, but it won't change the fact that I'm done playing this game. I'm done competing for their attention. I have a life, a husband, and people who actually care about me. That's what matters to me." Emily's expression hardened. "You're going to regret this?" "No," I said quietly. "I won't." She left in a huff, muttering under her breath about how ungrateful I was. I stood there for a moment, watching her drive away, feeling a strange sense of relief. For the first time, I wasn't chasing their approval. I wasn't trying to make peace or smooth things over. I was standing my ground. That night, Jake and I sat on the couch, enjoying a quiet evening together. He noticed my relaxed demeanor and smiled. "You seem lighter." "I am," I said. "I'm finally done with their drama." He squeezed my hand. "Proud of you." The fallout continued in the weeks that followed. More relatives reached out, expressing their support. My parents, meanwhile, were scrambling to control the narrative. They called family members, trying to paint me as the problem. But it wasn't working. People saw through their facade. They saw the pattern of favoritism, the way my parents had always put Emily on a pedestal, and they weren't buying the excuses anymore. One by one, relatives started declining invitations to Emily's engagement party. Some even called me directly, saying things like, "We never realized how bad it was, Lauren. We're sorry." I didn't need their apologies, but it was validating to know I wasn't imagining things. The final blow came when my dad's brother, Uncle Tom, reached out. He'd always been quiet, never one to rock the boat, but this time, he had something to say. "I'm not going to Emily's wedding," he said. "Your parents need to learn that actions have consequences." I was stunned. Uncle Tom had always been the peacekeeper in the family, the one who stayed out of conflicts. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "That means a lot. They've spent too long treating you like you don't matter," he continued. "It's time they realize they can't keep doing that." His words stuck with me. For the first time, I felt seen, not just by Jake, but by my extended family as well. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "Can we talk?" I stared at the message, debating whether to respond. After everything they'd put me through, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what she had to say, but a part of me was curious. Would this finally be the apology I'd been waiting for? I took a deep breath and typed out a response. "Okay, let's talk." My mom suggested we meet at their house, but I refused. I wasn't stepping back into that place where I'd felt invisible for so long. Instead, I chose a neutral coffee shop downtown, a place where I could leave if things went south. When I arrived, my mom and dad were already seated, their faces tense. It was clear they weren't here to apologize. They were here to defend themselves. They looked uncomfortable in the bustling cafe, out of place in their usual air of authority. I sat down, took a deep breath, and got straight to the point. You said you wanted to talk, so talk. My mom looked at my dad, as if waiting for him to take the lead. He cleared his throat, fiddling with his coffee cup. We've been very hurt by what's been going around the family. Hurt? I repeated, my voice colder than I intended. Do you have any idea how hurt I've been? You skipped my wedding? You ignored one of the most important days of my life. And now you're mad that people are talking about it? We didn't think it would be such a big deal, my mom said quietly, not meeting my eyes. That admission hit me like a punch to the gut. They truly hadn't understood the gravity of their actions. Or worse, they had understood and just didn't care. It was a big deal to me, I said, my voice shaking with suppressed anger. It was my wedding day, and you made it clear that I wasn't important enough for you to show up. My dad shifted uncomfortably. We thought Emily needed us more. I stared at them in disbelief. She needed you more? She wasn't even engaged when I got married. They fell silent, unable to come up with an excuse. For the first time in my life, I saw them for what they were. People who had made me feel small for so long that they didn't even realize the damage they'd done. You've spent my entire life putting Emily first, I continued, my voice steadying. And I'm done with it. I'm done being second best. My mom's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't moved. I'd seen this show too many times before. We didn't mean to make you feel that way, she whispered. But you did, I said firmly. And you still are. Even now, you're more worried about how this looks to the family than about how I feel. My dad leaned forward, trying to regain control of the conversation. We just want to make things right. Can't we move past this? Make things right? I scoffed. You think we can just move past it without even acknowledging what you did? He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand to stop him. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to set boundaries. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. If you ever want a real relationship with me, it starts with acknowledging what you've done, not excuses, not deflecting. Real accountability. Silence hung between us. My mom dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, and my dad sat rigid, his jaw clenched. You have no idea how hard it's been for us, my mom said after a long pause. We've always tried to do our best for both of you girls. No, I corrected her. You've always done your best for Emily. I was just there, an afterthought. That's not true, my dad snapped, his temper flaring. We've supported you too. We helped you with college. We've always been there when you needed us. I shook my head. You helped me with the bare minimum. You didn't even want to attend my wedding. That says everything. More silence. My mom fiddled with her coffee cup, avoiding my gaze. We thought Emily's wedding would be a chance to bring everyone back together, she said quietly. We wanted to start fresh. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You think her wedding is a fresh start? You haven't even addressed what happened at mine. You can't just pretend it didn't happen. My dad sighed, rubbing his temples. Lauren, what do you want from us? I want honesty, I said. I want you to admit that you've treated me differently, that you've always put Emily first. They exchanged a look. My mom looked hesitant, but my dad shook his head. We're not going to sit here and admit to something that isn't true. I stood up, grabbing my bag. Then there's nothing left to say. My mom reached out, her hand trembling. Please, Lauren, don't do this. We're still your family. I pulled my hand away. Families don't treat each other like this. I turned and walked out, leaving them behind. As I stepped into the crisp air outside, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't the closure I'd hoped for, but it was something. I had stood up for myself, and for the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of their expectations. When I got home, Jake was waiting for me. How did it go? He asked, concern etched on his face. I shrugged, setting my bag down. About how I expected. They're never going to change. He pulled me into a hug. I'm proud of you. I buried my face in his shoulder, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and relief. It's hard to accept that they'll never be the parents I wanted. I know, he said gently, but you've built a life without their approval. That's something to be proud of. The next few days were quiet. I didn't hear from my parents, and I wasn't expecting to. But then a package arrived in the mail. It was a photo album, filled with pictures from my childhood, ones I hadn't seen in years. There was a note tucked inside the front cover. Lauren, we're sorry for everything. We're trying to understand. Love, Mom and Dad. I sat down with the album, flipping through the pages. Memories of birthday parties, school plays, and family vacations stared back at me. Moments that, at the time, had felt insignificant because they were always overshadowed by Emily's achievements. Jake sat beside me, resting his hand on my knee. What do you think? I closed the album and set it aside. I think they're trying, in their own way. But it's too little, too late. He nodded. So, what now? Now, I said, taking his hand. Now, I keep moving forward. With you. With the people who actually care about me. That evening, I sent a text to my parents. Thank you for the album. I appreciate the gesture. But if you really want to make things right, it starts with accountability. Until then, I need some space. I didn't expect a reply, and none came. But for once, that silence felt empowering. I wasn't waiting for their approval. I wasn't hoping for a resolution that might never come. I was finally free. As Jake and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in years. The weight of my family's expectations was gone, and for the first time, I was truly at peace. Days turned into weeks, and life settled into a peaceful rhythm. I wasn't expecting any more drama, but life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. One evening, Jake and I were enjoying a quiet dinner when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. Hello? I answered cautiously. Lauren? It's Emily. Her voice took me by surprise. It wasn't the confident, condescending tone I was used to. Instead, it sounded strained, almost desperate. What do you want, Emily? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. There was a pause on the other end. I need to talk to you, in person. It's important. I glanced at Jake, who raised an eyebrow in concern. He knew how much emotional energy these interactions drained from me. Why? I asked. What's so important that you need to see me face to face? It's about Mom and Dad, she said, her voice cracking slightly. They're not doing well, Lauren. And I think you need to know what's been going on. That caught my attention. Despite everything, they were still my parents. I couldn't just ignore something serious happening to them. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet Emily the next day at a nearby park. When I arrived, Emily was already there, sitting on a bench with her hands folded in her lap. She looked different, less polished, more subdued. As I approached, she stood up and offered a tentative smile. Thanks for coming, she said. Let's get to the point, I replied, crossing my arms. What's going on? Emily sighed and motioned for me to sit. I remained standing. Mom's been having a hard time since our last conversation, she began. She hasn't been sleeping well. Dad's worried about her. I didn't say anything, waiting for her to continue. They're really upset about the family drifting apart, Emily said. They've always tried to keep things together, but it's different now. I couldn't help but scoff. They're upset because they're facing the consequences of their own actions. That's not my responsibility, Emily. I know, she said quickly. I'm not here to blame you. I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to meet them halfway. Meet them halfway? I repeated. What does that even mean? I've already told them what I need. Accountability. They've never once acknowledged how they've treated me. Emily looked down at her hands. I know they've made mistakes. I know they've hurt you. But they're trying, Lauren. They really are. I shook my head. Trying isn't enough. They need to own up to what they did. Until then, I'm not putting myself back in a situation where I'm constantly second best. Emily's eyes filled with tears. I miss you, she whispered. I miss us being a family. Her vulnerability took me by surprise. For a moment, I saw a glimpse of the sister I'd always wanted, the one who didn't need to compete or put me down. But I couldn't forget the years of hurt. I miss the idea of a family, I said softly. But I can't miss something I never really had. Emily wiped her eyes. I get it, I do. But Mom and Dad aren't getting any younger. What if it's too late? The weight of her words settled heavily on my chest. I thought of the photo album they'd sent, the note inside. Maybe they were trying, in their own flawed way. But was it enough? I need time, I said finally. I'm not ready to forgive and forget, but I'll think about it. Emily nodded, looking relieved. That's all I'm asking. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were shifting. I wasn't sure what would come next, but one thing was clear. I was no longer the same person who had spent years chasing their approval. Back home, I told Jake about the conversation. What do you think? He asked, ever supportive. I think they're scared, I said. Scared of losing control? Scared of losing me? And what about you? Are you scared? I thought for a moment before shaking my head. No, for the first time, I'm not. Jake smiled, pulling me into a hug. Then you're stronger than you think. His words stuck with me. Maybe I was stronger. Maybe I didn't need their validation anymore. But part of me still hoped for something more, a real connection, built on mutual respect. The next morning, I received a text from my dad. "Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "Okay, but this time, you need to listen." The next day, I met my dad at the same coffee shop where I had confronted him and my mom weeks earlier. This time, though, it was just the two of us. He looked older than I remembered, his usual confident posture replaced by a tired slump. It was strange to see him like that, vulnerable. "Thanks for meeting me," he said as I sat down. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "You said you wanted to talk, so talk." He took a deep breath. "Your mom's not doing well. She's been struggling since everything happened. I know you think we're the villains in your story, but we never meant to hurt you." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "It's not about intentions, Dad. It's about actions. You made your choices, and those choices hurt me. You've never acknowledged that." He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to his coffee cup. "I see that now. I didn't want to admit it before, but I see it." For the first time, I heard a note of genuine regret in his voice. It wasn't the defensive, dismissive tone I was used to. It sounded real. "Then why didn't you come to my wedding?" I asked quietly. "Why did you make me feel like I didn't matter?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "We were wrong. Your mom and we thought we were protecting Emily. She was upset about you getting married first, and we didn't want to make things worse." "That's exactly the problem," I said. "You always put her feelings above mine. It's been like that my whole life." He didn't argue. Instead, he nodded. "I know, and I'm sorry." Those words hung in the air between us. I had waited years to hear them, but now that they were finally spoken, they felt hollow. Apologies without action meant nothing. "What about Mom?" I asked. "Does she feel the same way?" "She's struggling," he admitted. "She knows she made mistakes, but it's hard for her to face them. You know how she is. She doesn't like to admit when she's wrong." I sighed. "That's not good enough, Dad. I need more than half-hearted apologies and vague regrets." He nodded again. "I understand. I don't expect you to forgive us overnight, but I want to try. I want to rebuild our relationship." I looked at him for a long moment, trying to gauge his sincerity. There was a time when I would have jumped at the chance to fix things, to have the family I'd always wanted, but now I wasn't sure. "I need boundaries," I said firmly. "If we're going to try this, it has to be on my terms. No more guilt trips. No more putting Emily first. And no more pretending everything is fine when it's not." He nodded. "Agreed. And you need to hold Mom accountable," I added. "She can't keep brushing things under the rug." "I will," he promised. "I'll talk to her." There was a long silence before he spoke again. "We miss you, Lauren. We really do." "I miss the idea of family," I said softly. "But I'm not willing to lose myself to keep it." He looked down, nodding slowly. "I understand." We sat there in silence for a while, both lost in our thoughts. Eventually, I stood up, ready to leave. "I'll think about it," I said, "but I'm not making any promises." "That's all I can ask," he replied. Back home, Jake was waiting for me. "How did it go?" he asked. I shrugged. "Better than I expected. Worse than I hoped." He nodded, wrapping his arms around me. "What do you want to do?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Part of me wants to give them another chance, but another part of me is scared they'll never change." "You don't have to decide right now," he said gently. "Take your time. Do what feels right for you." Over the next few days, I thought a lot about my dad's words. I thought about the years of hurt, the endless comparisons to Emily, the times I felt invisible, but I also thought about the possibility of change. In the end, I decided to meet them halfway, on my terms. I agreed to attend a family dinner, with the understanding that we would have an honest conversation about the past. The dinner was awkward at first. My mom was clearly uncomfortable, and Emily kept shooting me nervous glances. But eventually, the conversation shifted to the issues that had been festering for years. "I want to hear it from you," I said to my mom. "Why didn't you come to my wedding?" She hesitated, her eyes welling with tears. "I was scared," she admitted. "Scared of losing Emily, scared of admitting that we'd made mistakes. And now," I pressed, "now, I just want my daughters back," she said softly. It wasn't a perfect apology. It wasn't everything I needed, but it was a start. As the evening went on, we talked more openly than we ever had before. There were tears, apologies, and uncomfortable truths, but there was also hope, a glimmer of what our family could be if we all put in the effort. When I left that night, I felt lighter. I wasn't sure what the future held, But for the first time, I felt like we were moving in the right direction. At home, Jake was waiting for me with a smile. "How was it?" he asked. "Progress," I said with a smile. "Slow, messy progress." He pulled me into a hug. "That's all that matters." And he was right. It wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. About choosing to move forward, even when the path was uncertain. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Hopeful that maybe, just maybe, we could build something new, something real.